Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics, back with the Pint Size Table Runner, and this time it's for August. I know in my garden, when everything is just really coming on full force, the raspberries are coming on, the bees are everywhere. So when I sat down to focus on what would be a nice theme for August, we chose for the appliqué our beehive with the bees buzzing around, pollinating all the wonderful flowers. And I couldn't resist really tapping back into a classic block. This time it's the Churn Dash block. Really fun. I really enjoyed making each of the blocks different this time. I can't tell you how much I'm enjoying being able to be very involved in this series and choosing the fabrics and just really getting my hands on each of the projects every month. So let's dive into it. If you're just seeing this, maybe you don't even know anything about the Pint Size Table Runner series. We started this many months ago. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already done that. We're coming out with new content both for Shabby Fabrics and our new brand, Shabby at Home with Chase. She is often doing video for us, showing us some nice ideas of things we can do to add some really wonderful touches to our home. I love her look. Be sure to join that Instagram channel as well. Shabby at Home or At Home with Shabby. I can't remember which of those two it is. Amazing. Trace has some really great content. But for this series, if you haven't already really gone back and check out those various videos, be sure to do that. Limited kits available every time we come out. You can either just download that pattern. For a limited time, the pattern will be free and use your fabrics at home. Or if you would like to grab one of our kits, all of the applique, pre-fused and laser cut, no tracing and no cutting, all of that's done for you, including a backing, your binding. I love that. And of course, we're putting the pattern in the kit as well. And we'll also be putting some of the black embroidery floss. We'll be touching on those stitches a little bit later on in this video. So for the Churn Dash block, very simple block. We're going to start off with our half square triangles. So as I mentioned, the fabrics are changing in each of the corner, but the constant, of course, is that background fabric. Be sure to refer to your diagram here to make sure you're cutting that background just as shown here. Notice there's not a lot of extra fabric left over, so I want to specifically emphasize to be quite mindful of when you're cutting that background fabric. It's used extensively. For our half square triangles, we oversized those slightly, so we're having you cut 3-inch squares of both your background fabric and your colored fabric. We'll be working on this one here. Place those fabrics right side together, and even before you place them together, with that white fabric and the pretty kind of X's or whatever, maybe if you're sewing from home, you're going to choose as your background. Place that right side down, and you can either draw a line and sew corner to corner. In fact, let me get a little bit of a bigger ruler. You've got two techniques here, two approaches. You can either just draw the line as such, and then take that to your sewing machine and placing these right side together, sewing a 1/4 inch on either side of that. In fact, let's take that approach. I want to show you, I've got some diagonal seam tape on my machine that helps me line up. It's really cool. I want to show it to you. And then I'll talk to you about what the option would have been if you prefer to use a different approach. So now that I'm at the machine, I've got, this is called Diagonal Seam Tape by Cluck Cluck Sew. It's an awesome tape. Can easily come off the machine. Just pull it off and put down a fresh piece. So what's nice about when you draw this line and you're trying to get that 1/4 inch away from that on both sides, notice how when I approach the machine, let me get my hands out of the way, that line is pointing right down that. How nice, right? So I am looking at that place as I begin to sew. I'm not going to take my gaze off of that. So the same thing, I'll just make sure I'm keeping my gaze here, sewing on the other side of the line. So now we have that sewn on either side. If you prefer to sew on a drawn line instead of sewing along a 1/4 inch away from that, Creative Grid has a seam guide, how you would use this. In fact, let me just iron that line away so you're not even looking at that. Let's pretend like this is just 2 pieces of fabric that we hadn't sewn anything yet. Seam guide, easy to use. Comes in a 9-inch length. We also have the 15-inch length for bigger blocks. The 9 inch is all we need for this. You would just line this up corner to corner, just like that, and mark on either side of that. And now, that's what you're going to be sewing on. So it's your choice. But I wanted to be able to give you that option. All right. Whichever approach you take, once you have that sewn, you'll take a straight edge and just cut corner to corner. Now you'll need to repeat that one more time for each of the Churn Dash blocks. Looking on the back side here, you see how we went ahead and pressed toward the dark. So we'll do that here. Remember how I said we were cutting these to 3 inches? The rule of 7/8 applies with half square triangles. What that means is, if you're not like, what are you talking about? If you want to finish with a 2-inch half square triangle, which we do, we have 6-inch blocks in our Churn Dash block, and each of these sections is finishing at 2 inches once it's sewn into the project. The rule of 7/8 is add 7/8 to your finished measurement, which is 2 7/8. If you do that and make your half square triangles, there's nothing to square up. We like to bring that up by an extra 1/8 of an inch to a full 3. That way now we have the ability to square these up so they're just going into our Churn Dash block perfectly. So this is where I like to bring in my spinning mat, and I will bring in my 2.5 inch. We need to square these up to 2.5 so that when they're sewn into the project with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, they will measure at 2. So here, I'm going to lay this along my seam. And I want to make sure that I have enough real estate to square up on all 4 sides, meaning don't tuck this in the corner and just clean up 2 sides. Bring this so that you are seeing fabric poking out on all 4 sides so that you have an opportunity to square up. What I love about the spinning mat now is I don't have to move my fabric. We simply move around our fabric. I don't have to lift it up. Right there. And now, as we saw with our ruler fit exactly on top, it's exactly 2.5 going into the project. So be sure that you don't forget to square up. Otherwise, your blocks aren't going to be coming out the right size. Of course, you'll be doing that for your other 3 half square triangles, and I've done that ahead of time just to save us some time, so we have a total of 4. Let's move on to the little bit of strip piecing we have here, and that's where I really love to use my 1.5 inch wide Creative Grid. It's 1.5 by 12.5. I love that it's the exact measurement that I really need my fabric to be. So you'll cut your strips, and I think I've got them right here. How nice, right? To just be able to lay your ruler down on top of your fabric and just be able to trim all the way around that. Again, you could be using a spinning mat with that. So nice and convenient. You don't have to wonder, did I cut that perfectly? Yes, you did, because you cut around the literal shape of that ruler. Place your fabrics right side together, sewing that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Again, the diagonal seam tape is wonderful for that, to get that very consistent 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once that's done, we press to, it looks like the dark side here. And now you'll cut your sections. So let's move on into our pattern, and we'll cut those into 2.5-inch sections. Again, if you wanted to use this to help you find your sections, isn't that nice? You can use your ruler. I'm going to square this up, get a nice clean edge here. Let's start off with something else. I line up on the ruler, and I line up on my mat initially along the line to get a clean cut. Once I do that, though, the rulers become king. I'm not even really looking at my mat. Now I'm looking at my ruler. That line's going right along our seam allowance. We cut 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and now we have all of our elements that we need for our churn dash block, and of course you're just going to have a center square cut to 2.5. So let's bring that out. I love how simple the churn dash block is. If you're new to quilting, this is a great block for you, and it's a classic. I love touching back into the old blocks that really are, they're classic, right? That's where quilting started. Be sure to refer to your image of your project to lay this out. You guys know I give you all my true confessions about blocks sewn wrong. This is one I've definitely sewn wrong. So lay everything out. Make sure you've got what you need before you start sewing anything together. Be very easy to sew this one in the wrong orientation. I have another one of those blocks. There we go. Let me get this out of that way. So let's look at this now. We have everything laid out, and you can see that center square. When I'm trying to decide on pressing, I'm like, all right, what block has no seams going on? What portion of this block? Of course, that's the center. So that's a natural place to start with things right side together, sewing that 1/4-inch seam allowance. Same here, and pressing toward the middle, which is what we did right here. Here, of course, 1/4-inch seam allowance, same. Right side together, 1/4-inch seam allowance, same down here, and you're sewing your rows together. So I just wanted you to see that. So it's always nice to be able to see the back of a block. Again, that's just the idea that we chose to press our block together. So very, very straightforward on assembly of the churn dash block. For the applique portion, actually before I jump into the applique portion, once you make your churn dash blocks, just like we've done in the previous months, that sashing we're cutting to the 1 by 6.5 inches. And when you're sewing your blocks side by on either side of that, be sure to press toward your sashing. Again, there are no seams here, right? That's where the seams are going to want to go anyway. You'll do the same here and here when you sew that together, and you're assembling the center portion. Down here on the applique ends, it's just like we've done in our previous months, but this time we've got some hand embroidery. I'm excited about that. I will show you the stitches. We have a running stitch, a back stitch, and some French knots. So be sure, I'll kind of save that till the end. So if you're like, I already know how to hand embroidery, you'll be able to skip that portion. But if you're like, nope, I need to dust off the cobwebs, remind me how to do that. I will be going through those stitches with you. We have our wafer 1 light box, our applique pressing mat. Really fun on this one. I want to show you the applique ends. I could not resist adding a little bit of sparkle here. Hopefully you can see that. That's the Michael Miller Fairy Frost. It has a little bit of glitter in it so that the wings of our bees kind of flicker in the light. I thought that was really fun. So on this one here, just like we've done before, we will be laying out our assembly diagram. If you are going to be downloading this, it'll be, of course, in 2 pieces. Just make sure you're aligning the registration of those 2 diagrams, taping that together, and just like we've done before, pieces that are number 1 go down first, followed by 2, 3, and so on and so forth to help you understand layering. And any dash lines mean that piece lays behind. Piece 1, of course, is lying behind piece number 3. It just helps you kind of reference that and understand the correct layering. I've already done the the two ends, we just can kind of focus on this portion. I would create this element. I create the bee separately, the flower separately, and let's just go do this part together. It's always fun to kind of refresh ourselves on that. Remember, my go-to is always like, okay, what piece do I have all of my elements, right? Do I have all of that? And what's my orientation? So we can see that it's going to start with our top piece and build down, finishing with our door. So let's bring those pieces out. And now it's time to bring that heat back down. Always remind yourself that as soon as you start grabbing for applique shapes, you need to bring that down. Applique pressing mat is going on next, and I'm going to move my wool pressing mat because, as we know, we cannot iron on our light box. We do need to lateral that over once we have everything in position. So let's just get that arranged. Piece number 1 is going down. Got a lot of stuff on this table with me. Okay, piece 1 is down. How nice. We did not have to cut any of this out, trace all of this out. You know, before all of this technology, I was bringing pieces onto the background one by one. Most patterns don't have an assembly or layout diagram, and you're kind of just winging it a little bit, hoping you have the registration right. Some of my projects were better than others, I'll just say that. So we know that having these tools surely makes the process so much easier and more accurate and more fun. Now we move that off to the side, and we're just going to let the iron come straight down 4 to 5, maybe 6 seconds, where all of the layers are merging together. Just like that. We talked about it in the previous months, your background fabric. The dashed lines here are representing the exact size of that background. When you get your kit, you have enough fabric that you don't have to cut your background to that exact size if you don't want to. You can leave that oversized. Some people do that. They still put that down on top of their light box and they actually draw around where those cut lines will be. Your preference, if you want to cut that background to the exact size or you want to leave it oversized, do the applique, stitch everything down with that 50 weight thread set, and then be able to trim up that piece to the exact size. That's really going to be your choice and your comfort, whatever you want to do. That is still warm. I need to let that, if you don't let this cool down and you pick this up, the likelihood of the layers coming apart is high. So you just need to have some patience. I want to just take that off and get going with you, but we do need to let that cool down. So when I get ready to lay out my background, we did cut our background in this instance to the exact size. And I see our scallop here has the fusible on the back. And if this is the first project you've ever seen with laser cut shapes, to release that, sometimes people struggle. Just give a good hard press, and you see how that just released? Okay. And we can see, because that scallop actually fits right up along that top, we really don't even need the light box for that. That can just get ironed down right now. Let's just do that while we're waiting for our beehive to cool down. When you have an applique project such as this, when you have these different elements, you don't have to lay out, well, what is there, 33 different laser shapes and try to move them all at once. Make your flower, put it aside. Make that flower, put it aside. It's so much easier to manage that, and you're just going to start with the lowest number that's in whatever that element is that you're going to be pre-assembling. So let's take that off, and look at that. It's now one shape. So I love, I've got my little bees. We're gonna lay out this whole thing. So we'll lay this back on, turn our light box on. We don't really need our mat anymore. It's done its good work. And really, I've got this shape over here. Notice how the stems do go into the bottom there. I think I needed to bring my stem up a little bit higher. I can see that stem, and let me show you what I'm talking about. See how this stem went up a little bit higher underneath the flower, but when we put that there, it's now poking out. No problem. Just give that a trim, right? We just wanted to have that stem poking underneath there, and I can see that we did that before we created a little diagram. We just want to make sure that that is going to be all kind of rolled up when we put our binding on our project. Let's continue laying out our shapes. There we go. We're just letting each of those areas warm up. Try to not overlap if you can avoid it. Sometimes it's unavoidable. What I mean by that is sometimes certain applique elements are in such close proximity to the next applique element that you can't help but having the iron touch that. We just want to minimize the number of times that the fusible is heated up and cooled down. There is a failure point, I think, with probably almost any fusible applique product that if it's heated, I don't have a number even in my mind. Just try to avoid that. I know certain elements that I've done with much more layered applique have been heated 5-6 times and had no issue. But I just kind of try to make it a point, if I don't need to reheat this, to heat this up, I try to avoid that. Just something extra to think about. How cute is that? Absolutely adorable. All of that pre-fuse and laser cut for you. Definitely you can see the value of these kits is very high. And the joy factor too. You can just jump into the fun part of that. This is where you're stitching those down with a straight stitch. Maybe you want to use a blanket stitch. Whatever you want to do, that's the stage you would do that in now. Once that's done, we would move right into the hand embroidery. Again, this is really where the diagram comes into play, and we like to use a friction pen because it can iron away with heat. The friction pen is my absolute go-to anytime I'm going to be doing hand embroidery. We'll just draw that in. This is the running stitch with our little antenna and that little circle on the end that we'll be doing some French knots. Okay, you get the idea, right? You're just going to continue drawing all of those elements on, and now we move on to our hand embroidery. What I've got here is actually just a piece of the background fabric, so we can get a little bit closer versus having kind of this larger applique background, which I would absolutely stitch down first before you start handling it for the purposes of hand embroidery. I would make the hand embroidery really my last step. And once that is done, that's where you're going to sew that onto either end of that. And you'll just, at that point, layer your batting, your backing that's in your kit, and then choose whatever quilting you want. Bethany stitched this one down. We can get a close-up on that. She just did a little bit of stitching in the ditch. I see that. And then she kind of accentuated some of the Churn Dash Blocks with some extra stitching. And then she did some really nice, pretty diagonal stitching there on the applique ends, and then bind your quilt. But let's stay together. If you're uncomfortable or maybe you want to dust off the cobwebs on some hand embroidery, we'll be running into those stitches right now with a running backstitch and French knot. But if you're like, I already know all that, I will look forward to seeing you in September for the Pint Size project. It's absolutely adorable. I've already designed it. And we're literally getting those kits put together for you right now. So I will see you next month. But if you'd like to stay with me, we're just going to get a close-up of covering all those stitches. I am going to go ahead and use this one since I want to show you how you can kind of start over here and bury that black kind of behind that. So we know our starting point is going to be here on this one. So I might come in a little bit shallow in the back just to anchor that knot back there. When you have a black thread and a light background, you want to be very mindful of how you're going to kind of begin and end. All right, now that we're here, with a running stitch, we'll pop up on the top. I've got 3 strands of embroidery floss. This is the Richard Hemming needles. Whatever hand embroidery needle you want to use is great. If you don't have a preference, this is a great one, very affordable. Now rock the needle back, rock the needle down, rock the needle back at the beginning of the line, rock the needle down, back, down. As you can see, running stitches go very quickly. Right, just smooth that out. I think it's one of my favorite stitches because it's it's quick. Okay, so you get the idea. That's how a running stitch is accomplished. And then I just smooth that out. You can even come from the back, kind of smoothing that out. And you don't have to take that many stitches. If you want to just take a few, in fact, let me just show you that. If you're like, that's too far, that's fine. We'll come up. Maybe you want to go down and rock back up just the one time. That's fine. That's fine. But just know you have the option of doing a couple at a time if you'd like to. Down. Maybe we'll do just 2 this time. Up, down, up, down. And if your stitches are a little bit different than your drawn line, that's the beautiful part about using a friction pen. Just iron it away and you'll continue on. All right, let me just dive down into that. And as you can see, actually, let me finish it. I want to show you how I would travel behind the bee, either cutting my thread or continuing over to do that. Let me just finish that up for you. I want you to see it. Okay, now that we're at the bee, which is good news, right? Let's get everything all smoothed out. In fact, if we missed anything, I'm going to go iron that away. I'm just going to remove that. That way, if my actual stitches deviated at all, it doesn't matter. That's what's the charm of this, right? It's handcrafted and it should look that way. We're behind the bee now. I could either just tie off here or I travel very shallow across the back, which I'm going to do. I'm going to keep this going because I actually want to travel over there and do that back stitch with you. What you don't want to do is just go straight across. That's how you get puckering and you get some gaps and maybe some, it's not an approach that I'd recommend. You want to very much anchor that. Okay, now we're over on this side. Here, we're going to come up and go down a short distance. On that line, we go down the same distance. It's you know, kind of you're eyeballing it, and come back into that same place. Let's do that one more time. Now this is with 3 strands. If you like a more delicate look, you can use 2 strands. Now on the end here, I'm just going to come up. We'll do a French knot. French knot, you're going to hold your embroidery floss to the left if you are right-handed and hold that in your left hand. The needle will come in front. I'm going to actually go around that 2 wraps because I want to have I want to have a noticeable kind of knot down there. We'll come right back through, and I'm going to trap that thread until I have to let it go. And that's how we make our little French knot for our antenna. And of course, you're going to repeat that. So as you can see, the hand embroidery stitches are very manageable, really easy. Still, if you're like, I really don't like handwork, that's okay. Grab a micron pen, a permanent marker, and just draw those dash lines in, and maybe the lines for the antenna and that little knot in the end. That's okay, it's your project, do what you want. So thanks for giving me part of your day to show you how to make the Churn Dash block. Go over the embroidery stitches. I will see you for Pint Size Table Runner in September.